So we got tutoring and classroom instruction, and along comes Bloom with this mastery instruction. We sort of corrupted his argument because we're not really, kind of aren't talking about mastery instruction. But he compared, he had 3 dissertation studies, compare classroom instruction with one-on-one tutoring. In a couple of cases he slipped into this 3-on-1 in a few cases, but it was a very small group and mostly one-on-one instruction. Now you expect the one-on-one instruction to be superior, right? But what was surprising is just how superior it was. It wasn't just a little bit, it was 2 standard deviations superior. So that means that, in effect, and this is an effect size. Are y'all familiar with effect sizes? Effect size is basically a measure of standard deviations that says how much better you're getting through some treatment. And it's a way of mushing together a whole bunch of studies and pulling up conclusions from them. But basically, an effect size of 0.2 is seen to be not much. 0.4, you assume that there's a real effect there, something happened. You get up to 0.6 and it's getting meaningful, gets above 0.8, and you're really getting something. That's viewed as a big effect. So this effect of 2 standard deviations, or as Bloom called it, 2 sigma, really big. Improvement of your 50th percentile performance up to about the 98th percentile. So there's a big, not just a difference between tutored instruction and classroom students, but a big difference. And so, Bloom issued this 2 standard deviation challenge, and it went on and on. But we might well ask, why is tutoring so effective? One thing is the personalization. There's this great little book by a fellow who was a tutor and a don at Oxford who wrote about tutoring. And it's very interesting because he said what's really important here is the one-on-one interaction between a human being and a student. And sometimes you wouldn't say anything, sometimes you just you talk about the latest, it was after soccer was invented, so okay, soccer scores, things of that sort. And now that's probably doable, but we haven't gotten around to seriously treating that. What I'm really interested in is this business of interactivity and immersion that we can do with technology and individualization. And I claim these are really important, and actually, this does kind of occur. You start dealing with the system and you begin to think of, it's almost, there's anthropomorphism going on. You think of it as maybe a person there, but not really a person, but something that's like a person. So there is a little bit of that, but that's beyond me at present. After trained as an experimental psychologist, I know nothing about people. So let's go on to the next slide. So okay, interactivity engagement. Here's some real numbers, courtesy of Gracer and Pearson and a little bit by me. But in a traditional classroom hour, a student will ask 0.1 questions an hour. That may seem odd to you because there is questioning going on in a classroom, but usually it's one of those 2 or 3 kids down front, and everybody else is sitting back, we're waiting for recess or something like that. And how often does the instructor ask questions of an individual student? About 3 times an hour. And these people sitting in the back of the classroom with stopwatches or looking at videotapes of classroom instruction, so it's real data. In a tutored system, you get 20 to 30 questions asked by the student per hour. And then the instructor will ask somewhere between 120 to 150 questions an hour. Some of them are, do you understand? Do you need to go to the bathroom? But a lot of them also have something to do with the education going on. I wanted to look at what was happening with computer-based instruction 150 years ago. Well, let's just say it was a long time ago, before there was dirt. And I found out that, and I counted the number of, these were 15-minute sessions or something like that. And I found that on Model 33 teletypewriters, zipping along at 110 baud, 10 characters a second, we found that the kids were answering somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 questions a minute, which is a lot. And if we actually got in there and glued them in for a whole hour, we'd get something like that. And we didn't hold them down that long. Well, the kids were willing to do that. The punishment they would offer, the teachers would mete out if the kid was not behaving. Say, Johnny, if you don't behave yourself, you can't go to the computer today. So this was, back in the dark ages, but it was, the kids liked it. And that, well, I'm getting into that argument in a minute. About individualization. So here are data on individual differences in time to learn. I'm sorry that these data are so old. There's no reason to believe that they're inaccurate because I looked at them pretty carefully. But I haven't been able to get back to it to find out what the real story is. And of course, in my business, I'd like to know what the differences are in a classroom of adults. But basically, you can see like 1 to 13. That's a problem in kindergarten because some kids come to kindergarten knowing how to read, and other kids come to kindergarten never having seen them. Well, they've seen the letters, but they have no idea what they are. Ratios of time reading overall in grades 1, this is grade 5. They got 1 to 3 to 1 to 5. And I think, where's Carol? Carol assumed on the basis of all the data that he'd seen and that these folks were gathering, that the ratio is probably about 1 to 5 in K-8. That means in a K-8 classroom, you're going to have some students who are there ready to learn something in a day, and you're going to have other kids that need 5 days to learn the same thing. Well, that's a tremendous gap, a tremendous spread, I got to say. And so what do teachers do? It's a problem. What you do is basically you focus on those that you can. Because of the amount of work available, you can only focus on, you got room 26 to 30 students, or 26.5, which is the national average. Last kid's a little weird, but okay, 26.5. So you look at them all, and you've got to have a good number of them who are bored out of their minds, and a good number of the others who are simply lost. It turns out it's based on prior knowledge. I mentioned this business up here about knowing how to read. The most direct measure telling you what the spread is going to be has to do with prior knowledge. Not so much with ability, but ability and prior knowledge are kind of intertwined and all of that. But it's basically that. And my assumption is that among adult learners, which is where I worry a lot, well, post-secondary. It's an 18-year-old and adult now, okay, post-secondary. What I worry about is the business of, I suspect they come with far more prior knowledge baggage than anybody else, and it may be increasingly important as your students get older. That's in the slide. So then you got these folks from no, never mind. Somebody can pronounce it. But in the 4th century, I got the quote, but I wanted, I had room for one, so I only put in the Thorndike here. But Quintilian in the oratory, somewhere or other, says things about individual differences. And E.L. Thorndike, Supes also has a nice statement about it. But it basically says the responses of children to any stimulus will vary with their individual capacities, interest, and previous experience. And that is a serious problem for any classroom. Individualization, one more time, becomes important. So this is 1906. So we're gradually speeding up here. It only took 75, maybe 70 years for Scriven to note that individualization is an educational imperative and an economic impossibility. Except for some very serious, surgery. Yeah, you see one. You see one, you try one, you do one. I can't remember what it is.
See one, do one, teach one.
There, that's it. Thank you. See one, do one, teach one. Right. Thank you very much. So you get that in surgery. So you do get that kind of tutorial interaction, sort of. And flying airplanes. There's still a matter of you don't want the airplanes to be flying out of the sky because students haven't had an instructor there with his hands on the throttle that weren't needed. So all right, but you can't afford it, and so that's where we come in. Oh yeah, I've been saying this. I've been saying that since a while, and I think the Carnegie Mellon folks have picked it up and published about this now. And where they got it, so it has become. People are getting to realize that if you want to do it, if you want to get serious about education and dealing with this issue of individual differences, you got to use a computer. It's the only way you can afford it. Okay, so now finally we can say something about technology in instruction. Those are books, of course. He's cranking in there. We'll see how it goes. Enter the computer. Okay, so you have these revolutions that have occurred in learning. And one of them, of course, was writing. Whatever it was, 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, we learned not just to draw pictures, but to have something that had, let's say, phonemic consequences. And so we have writing invented. That meant that you didn't have to go to a sage to learn something. You had to carry around these, clay tablets, and so you had to block up a little bit if you wanted to learn. But anyways, you had to do that. And of course, papyrus came along. That was helpful. And people learned that you skin a sheep and start writing on that. It makes these nice little codices that you could use. So all that was done. So we got away from having to go to a particular sage to get the tutorial instruction or the instruction you saw. And after that, of course, along came books. And the Chinese invented movable type in about 1000 AD. So that sort of got the East going, East with a capital E. And then about 500 years later, Gutenberg comes along. And so we have it in the West too. And what that did, of course, is it made the content, it is not just available anytime, anywhere, but affordable anytime, anywhere. Now, these are two very major revolutions in learning, and I would claim, just for the fun of it, that we're into a third one right now. Because now we can make affordable content, we get affordable content, and the individualized interactions involved in learning, in tutorial, made available anywhere, anytime. And we've got a lot to learn before we really do this well, but we are doing it now, and it's going to get better. So I claim that is a serious revolution equivalent to learning in books. And we can argue about that, but that's for beers and stuff later.